welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, joined today by Bryce Rossler, also of the SIS R&D team. We've got our producer, Justin Stein, with us. Mark is maxing, relaxing, all cool today. So just me and you, Bryce, and we're going to break the mold today a little bit. We're going straight off the dome, or at least I am. You've got some notes here. You got some stats for us. But we're going to talk about the contenders. We're going to break down each of the contenders. Bryce, you're going to tell us a stat to know about each of the teams that we reel off. And then we're going to have some conversation. What do we like and what do we not like about these teams as they progress into December and potentially make a playoff run? So on that note, Bryce, welcome. How's it going, man?
It's going all right. I wouldn't call these teams contenders per se, but that's a bit of a semantic issue.
Yeah, you know what? I like that. I like nitpicking about semantics. So let's talk about that first, because you can say contender to be a playoff contender or to be a Super Bowl contender. This is one thing that I go nuts about with scouting all the time, is that people say that this is a good trait or this is a very good trait. And they say, I think that's good on the NFL level. That doesn't mean it's actually good on the NFL level. In order to be good, it has to be good on a Super Bowl contending team. And so to be an actual contender, yeah, you're a Super Bowl contender. Maybe that's one thing that we can touch on with some of these teams. Which ones are just playoff contenders and which ones are actual Super Bowl contenders? I think that would be interesting to touch on. AFC, let's start right at the top. Somehow at the top of the standings, the 9-4 New England Patriots. First seed right now, if the season ended today, they're getting that one lone coveted bye. Think about things I like. That's maybe one of them. What's the stat to know about the Patriots?
So what stood out to me is if you look at the defensive total points rankings for this season, the Patriots are one of just two NFL defenses right now to rank in the top three in all three phases. That's run defense, pass coverage, and pass rush. So we've started to have seen a bit of a return to identity for the Patriots after a down year last year in 2020. And this feels like a pretty complete team right now. Obviously, they don't have Tom Brady. There's a bit of a dip in quarterback play from Tom Brady to rookie Mac Jones. But this is a team that's playing a really well-rounded style of football right now. They've got a good defense, and it just doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of holes on this team.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, as far as the things to like, balance was the first word that came to mind for me. You look across their rankings, both really offensively and defensively, they're not lacking in any category. Their receivers are their worst position group on their team. And that's pretty unsurprising when you think about how they're built. But when it comes down to like looking at how they played on Monday night, you've got to like the ability of a team that can morph to sort of the conditions. And it can definitely, as it gets colder, they can morph to those sorts of games. I wonder if they can morph to track meet mode if they have to get into a track meet. I think right there we go from things I like to things I don't like. That would be kind of like my one question about them would be like, are the Patriots the sort of team that if they have to go against just a super high powered offense, if they're going trying to keep up with the Chiefs, Cardinals, Bucks, are they going to be able to play in those games? Because obviously they can play in Buffalo with 30-degree wind or whatever.
I think you hit on it. The weak point of the team is their ability to put up points in bunches. Obviously, you got a rookie quarterback. I think the thing with Mac Jones is that he might not be able to get you 30 points a game, but he's also not a liability either. You know, it's not like you got Zach Wilson out there and you're constantly having to fight against taking dumb sacks, throwing the ball to the other team.
Can I push back on that though? Because I agree. He's looked good this whole year, right? And he's been the best of the rookie quarterbacks in terms of, you know, what the production is. We said from the beginning, he's a high floor guy, but we also said low ceiling comes along with that. We saw him play the game on Monday night. Obviously it was strategic what they did, but Josh Allen could throw in that wind. I don't know if Mac Jones could throw in that wind. We didn't see enough to actually find out, but if he's a guy already that we have physical questions about, I think he can throw pretty well. That's a whole different story. And usually Northeastern teams, whether it be, you know, Midwestern teams or Northeastern teams, usually have that quarterback that has that arm that can cut through the wind like that. Is he that guy?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you watched that. I think it was the first throw of the game where he's throwing in the flat 8 yards downfield or something like that. And you just see the ball
like floating,
go into a tailspin. Arm strength was one of the big knocks on him coming out. I don't think that he's going to cut through the wind like that, like you said. I was just more speaking to the fact that he's not going to actively harm your team by turning the ball over unnecessarily, taking dumb sacks, taking these bonehead rookie plays that we've seen some of the other members of this rookie class.
Well, we're always talking about quarterbacks, win because of, win with, win in spite of, or you can't win with them. And we're talking about winning Super Bowls. He's somewhere on the win with to win in spite of in that range there. He's obviously not a guy that you can't win with. He's not like, to your point. So definitely agree with that, because you could probably say that about a lot of the different rookie quarterbacks this year.
Here, I've got a question for you. If you put Jimmy Garoppolo on this team instead of Mac Jones, do you like their chances more or less?
Same team.
Really?
I think they're the same team. Yeah, I actually, I might prefer Mac Jones. I mean, definitely long-term, I prefer Mac Jones with the contract and the age being considered and stuff like that. But I don't see Garoppolo as a significant difference from Mac Jones. Do they get slightly better? I don't know. Is that where you think?
I'd say Mac Jones might be slightly better than Garoppolo.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah.
I just think about, we're talking about win in spite of quarterbacks. And I think Jimmy G's right on that Mendoza line, so to speak. And being a former Patriot, I thought it might be a little interesting thought exercise.
Yeah, definitely interesting there. A couple more things that I like about them. I like some of the players on their defense. Adrian Phillips is third in total points among safeties. J.C. Jackson is first. He's tied with Jalen Ramsey now amongst corners. So some of their defensive personnel, we talked about Judon ad nauseum. We talked about him before the year. He was a guy that popped up on the pressures above expectation preseason list, along with guys like John Franklin Myers. That's a good little stat that you made there, Bryce, which certainly was predictive in those guys' performance this year. The other thing that I like, they're on their bye. They got a late bye that they're on right now. Then they come back with two tough games at Indianapolis next Saturday night, and then home against Buffalo. And then they finish with easy ones, theoretically, against Jacksonville and Miami. Maybe that'd be an important game for the Dolphins if they continue their winning streak. But a bye and then two really huge games that I think determine if they can solidify their spot as that number one seed. And then all they'd have to do is really hang on in week 17 and 18. And this is a team that feels a lot like an early 2000s Patriots team.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's keep it moving. Number two, the Titans, somehow still the second seed in the conference. They are 8-4, tied with a couple of other teams right behind them, but they've got that second spot. What is the stat that we need to know about the Titans?
So I'm going to caveat this with two things. One is that we know that on-off splits are heavily confounded. And we also know that correlation doesn't equal causation. But I'm going to use the Derrick Henry injury in week 8 as sort of the starting point for this stat. So prior to Henry going down, the Titans had grossed 15 expected points added on passing plays through their first 8 weeks of the season. So he gets hurt in week 8. They played 4 games since, and they've lost 27 expected points added in just 4 games. Julio went down in week 9. I think they lost A.J. Brown in week 11. So that's definitely part of this, but it just feels like this team is going to crash and burn. I don't have a whole lot of good things to say about the Titans. They're missing their 3 best players on offense right now. Them being the second seed, I don't know if that holds. I don't know if you have more optimism to share, but it looks pretty bleak for them right now.
No, I don't. I think that, they're in second place. What's not bleak is their schedule. I mean, they did just lose a couple of games, including to Houston, so they could lose to anybody. But games left on the schedule against Jacksonville, Houston, and Miami, not to mention the other 2 are Pittsburgh and San Francisco. So it's not like those are like unwinnable games by any sort of means. Like they're not like playing any quarterbacks that they should be afraid of over the course of the rest of the season. But they're pretty bad right now. And even when you look at total points over the course of the year, they're at 17th in their accumulated total points, and they're still in the second seed in the AFC East. So what I'll say that I like about them is that they've gone ahead and they've won some games, and that they've won close games, and they've got a better record than they probably deserve to have. And they still have a chance because their record is so good at actually making it to the playoffs. But when we talked about contenders for the Super Bowl, Patriots, I think you have to throw in that category, even though they're kind of like a tier 2 contender for me. The Titans, I think, are nowhere near a contender position.
Yeah, we see this the same way. I wish that I had some sort of silver lining here, but I struggle to come up with something to see the Titans making a deep playoff push. Like you said, the schedule is favorable the next couple weeks at 8-4 right now with the teams they've got remaining. It's hard to see them dropping out of the playoffs entirely just with the head start that they've got. But like we keep harping on, what is a Super Bowl contender once they get into the playoffs? It's hard to see them making a whole lot of noise given their situation right now, which is really unfortunate because they were a pretty fun team to watch the first half of the season.
Yeah, the defensive line, there's the three guys really that are playing awesome. Byard at safety, like they changed their defense this year, and unfortunately, that's when they lost Henry.
You lose Henry, you lose your big free agent signing in Julio Jones, you lose A.J. Brown. It's just they're on the outs right now. That's just the way it is in the NFL sometimes.
Oh, I think they're a little bit easier to diagnose. A team that I think is harder to diagnose is the 8-4 Ravens. The Titans, I think, were winning a lot of close games, kind of doing some interesting things to get to that 8-4 record. I think the Ravens kind of skated by for a little bit earlier in the year and haven't been as fortunate, 2-2 over their last 4 games. So what is the stat that we should know about the 3rd seed Ravens?
So the Ravens are kind of in a tailspin too. Prior to their bye week, Lamar Jackson ranked 7th in total points earned per pass. And since then, he's ranked 27th. So this is an offense that.
So since you wrote about him, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Don't need to throw it into my face. I thought that we had turned a corner with maybe Greg Roman pulling his head out of his ass, but this offense is super dysfunctional right now. You watch them and you can kind of see some of the frustration with players. It's hard to count them out when, or at least for me, when you're a believer in Lamar Jackson like I am, but they've been nicked by the injury bug a little bit too, and they definitely don't feel like they're rounding into form as we enter the home stretch here. I'm not really sure what to make of them. They
kind of bared through a lot of kind of questionable play earlier in the season, right? So you mentioned they've been in a tailspin lately. They were 2-2 in the month. It's not like they've been awful, but offensively they've been awful. They put up 19, 10, 13, and 10 in their last 4 games. So the offense really has suffered. But I think what's interesting about that is that their defense kind of hasn't played well a lot of the year. The defense is actually playing a little bit better now than it had been when they were winning a lot of those games because Lamar Jackson was just coming through with, that miracle against Kansas City, the Justin Tucker field goal we just talked about. They went in overtime against Indianapolis, a couple of things like that. So my big concern is I think that once they lost Marcus Peters, I think that the defense was fundamentally changed, and they really haven't been great on the back end all year. I'm with you in that I am a Lamar Jackson believer. They are a contender to me because of him in a lot of ways, but it's been like kind of ugly lately. And offensively outside of him, there's really nothing good going on. Something to like reinvent themselves to get back to what they were doing when they were putting up 33 and 36 and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I guess this is like we keep going back to Lamar Jackson, but how big of a believer are you in positive regression? Do you think that these are systemic issues that are causing the dip in the offense, or do you think that Lamar is slumping? I tend to lean that they're systemic problems in terms of offensive design.
So you think they shouldn't be doing the Colin Kaepernick offense for him?
No, it's not even that. It's just their passing game. The passing concepts don't make any sense to me. Their spacing is all out of whack. It doesn't seem very well conceived. I know that's super easy for me to say from the comfort of my chair, but I believe in the Ravens as a Super Bowl contender because of Lamar Jackson, but we're in year 4 or 5 of Greg Roman, and this stuff hasn't been figured out. So
early in the season, it looked good when they were running all the gap scheme stuff and then having the play action gap scheme stuff off of it. And Lamar Jackson's ADOT was at like 10, and they were going down the field, and it was like a stretch him deep and then run him when you've created that space through the deep ball. It seemed like there was something to that was like really, it was fun. Like it was fun to watch the first couple of weeks of the season, the way they were doing their run game. Frustrating for sure.
Yeah. I guess the bottom line for me is I wouldn't count out Lamar Jackson, but I am not inspired by Greg Roman.
I'm not inspired by their defense. That's the part that Link. So interesting. So where do they fall on the contender scale for you? You don't like them as much as the Patriots. You like them a lot better than the Titans, not as much as the Patriots.
Yeah, I would say like on that tier 2-3 bubble.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, I'd put them right there, right behind the Patriots probably. The Patriots have played a little bit better lately, but I do kind of like this roster better, even with all of their injuries. Moving it forward, let's go to the Kansas City Chiefs, the AFC champions, the team that I've been refusing to get off their bandwagon all season, and they're starting to prove me right a little bit, but still just clinging to that 4th seed at 8-4. What is the stat to know about the Chiefs?
Credit where credit is due. I was inspired to look at this by a tweet from Seth Galina, a friend of mine who's a writer at Pro Football Focus. And he had mentioned that...
You're allowed to be friends? Wow, I didn't know that.
Unless you're telling me otherwise.
No, I'm just kidding.
But it's been very in vogue to talk about too high defenses in the NFL. That's the trendy thing to talk about. And we talk a lot about how if teams are going to play too high, you want to force the opposing offense to prove that they can run. And Seth made an observation that while that is true, you can also hit these underneath passes when you've got 3 underneath defenders and quarters to force defenses to get back into the one high stuff. And the Chiefs have not been able to do either. So I got a couple stats to know. The first is that they face the lightest boxes in the NFL, period. Despite that, they are still one of the worst rushing teams in the league. They rank 25th in EPA per rush out of 11 personnel, which is obviously their base personnel. And they also rank 27th in EPA per play on short passes against quarters. So they can't run the ball to get teams out of quarters. They can't hit these low horizontal stretches to get teams out of quarters. And they're really just swimming upstream on offense right now because they can't force teams to get into one high so that they can exploit the personnel mismatches they get with Hill and Kelsey. And despite that, they've been still fairly effective. I mean, they're not the dominant Chiefs of the past couple years, but they've got to be able to do something to take teams out of that. I think part of that is Andy Reid has always been a big zone running guy. It's really hard to say, screw it, we're just going to call a zone run for the sake of calling a zone run and having success in the NFL. So we'll see if they figure that out. The one thing I do like is that their defense has been playing better. It feels super weird to say that we're worried about the Chiefs offense and we feel good about the Chiefs defense. If you had told me we'd be talking about them in this way at the start of the season, I would have told you you're out of your mind. But the defense has been playing a lot better. Like 5th best defense in EPA per play since that Bills blowout in week 5. And they just look a lot better. I don't even know if it's necessarily a schematic adjustment or what, but like you just watch them and it's like guys are playing better. You don't count out Patrick Mahomes. They're well positioned to get in the playoffs. They definitely get in. I would say that they're up there among the contenders. They're probably at the top of like the tier 2 group for me, especially if they get things figured out on offense and keep going the way they are on defense.
I see them as the top contender in the AFC right now. I still think with Patrick Mahomes, I don't care that he hasn't looked like himself recently. What you have seen is to your point, 2 things. Number one, the defense rounding into form. I don't think it was a coincidence that they started playing Jones more on the inside and they started to play a lot better on defense. Chris Jones is a really good defensive tackle. Now, I'm not going to begrudge them for what they did earlier in the year because I think some of the moving it around of him that they did, they've been a little bit more multiple in their fronts lately. And that's been exciting to watch. I think it's allowed them to confuse offenses a little bit. You know, as you can get this bag stuff, all of the really complicated things, the zone drops, the zone blitz drops and stuff like that mixed in, I think the whole defense really becomes more than the sum of its parts. That said, I don't feel confident that they're going to keep shutting people down in through the postseason. I think that defense is good enough to complement the offense, but I don't think it's a defense that, you know, you can hang your hat on. You can get Daniel Sorensen out of the lineup a little bit more and get a little bit better, shockingly, as a result of that. But all in all, I think that the defense, it's nice to see that they've gotten in a good enough spot to get by. It's nice to see that the offensive line, specifically the interior offensive line, has been really, really good. including the two rookies. And I just think that bodes well for Mahomes as we get to January and it becomes Mahomes time. If they can get that bye, I love them to make it out of the AFC. But even if they can't, that's the team that I think Mahomes, Kelsey, Hill, the way that offensive line has been rebuilt, and I think the defense has shown that they have the ability to be good enough. That's a team that I get really, really excited about. See, they'll play Vegas this week. In Vegas, they won't have to do much to get Vegas to play single high. Vegas will do that anyway. But then
they did that first game.
But then you look the following week, 4 days later, certainly they'll be playing against the Chargers, and they can expect to see a whole bunch of that. So really interesting with 2 games within 4 days. They're going to be seeing a lot of really different stuff defensively, but it's stuff that they see twice a year. So interesting to see how they react. Big 4-day stretch for them for sure. Let's take a quick break to talk about the All SIS team. This is the first time in history we have done an All-American team made by SIS through the SIS charting and statistics. We've obviously been working all year long, all of our video scouts, our ops department, charting every single game of the NFL and college football. And with those 130 FBS teams, all of their games being charted in intricate detail, we've put together the first ever All SIS team. Nathan Cooper and John Todd, the leaders of our scouting department over here, basically went through, looked at the total points leaders. It's based on total points leaders at each position. They did take some liberties to sub in players here and there where they thought it was more representative of who was really deserving of the All SIS recognition. But congratulations to all of the athletes that were recognized for the All SIS team. We've got the SIS first and second teams. You can find them on all of our platforms. First of all, on Twitter through @sportsinfo_SIS and @football_SIS. You can find it on our website at sportsinfosolutions.com. And please get engaged. Tell us what you think we got wrong. Tell us what you think you know better than total points. We love the criticism as much as we love the praise when you think we got something right. So please get in on that conversation. Check it out. Twitter's probably the best place to go. sportsinfo_SIS for the first ever All SIS team. Moving down to the 7-5 teams in the AFC. Let's talk about the Chargers, because I think that they are certainly a playoff contender and maybe still have that tier 2 range type scent on them for me. What's your stat to know about the Chargers?
The stat to know for the Chargers is that Justin Herbert ranks 3rd in total points per play from a clean pocket, which I think kind of cements his status as legitimate, especially when last year it was the shoe was on the other foot, right? Like he was really, really good under pressure, which is typically not very stable or predictive, and not so good from clean pockets. This year, that offensive line is better. He looks more in control of the operation and has just been really methodical. I hate to say it. I think I was wrong on Herbert. I didn't believe in him at all coming out, but I think he's a guy you win because of. I feel pretty confident saying that at this point. I think if you feel good about the Chargers, the main reason is because of Herbert. I would even say that I maybe feel the best about them coming out of the AFC. It's close between the Chiefs and the Chargers for me. The one thing that gives me trepidation with them is that run defense is not very good.
They intentionally stink.
Right, but so I know we say that passing wins games, and this goes back to the too high stuff. There's potential for them to get some really weird matchups in the playoffs, depending on how the seeding shakes out. Like if they get the Patriots or the Ravens, for example, are they going to be able to overcome that phase of their game to win in the playoffs?
And they lost to Baltimore 34-6. They lost to New England 27-24. Was a little bit closer, but those were the first kind of chinks in their armor that they showed. It's not a surprise that it was against teams that play like that, where they're like, "Oh, you want to let us run? Okay."
Yeah, I think about the Green Bay San Francisco game, where San Francisco just jammed it down the Packers' throats. They're going to run into a buzzsaw and get a bad matchup, take an exit in the playoffs because of that. I like them as a team. Those potential matchups scare me.
I like the Chargers too. I like Justin Herbert. Dead wrong about him coming out. I thought he was going to be a solid guy, maybe kind of like low tier type starter ability. I did not see a win because of type guy, and he has win because of type ability. There's no doubt about it. He's an unbelievable thrower of the football, and his ability to process and all this kind of stuff, it's much more than I thought it was. It's interesting with all the Mario Cristobal stuff. I was thinking about how Cristobal inherited him, and that wasn't when you talk to like draft people, and if you've watched the film of Herbert playing at Oregon, like it's interesting that Cristobal has such a fine reputation, because it's not, if you talk to scouts that have watched the film of him as a quarterback, there's a lot of blaming the offensive system for what we didn't see in Justin Herbert.
I'm definitely good with passing the onus on to Cristobal for sure, and recusing myself of any blame. It was just weird because we get that excuse for prospects coming out all the time, right? Is that, oh, their supporting cast was bad, or, oh, the offensive design was bad. Daniel Jones, I think, is a good example of that. And so seldom do you see guys actually come out like Herbert did and just destroy expectations.
Right away. Yeah. It's unbelievable. And he's done it for what it's worth. He's done it with 2 offensive systems already young in his career. I think that, according to total points, he's been better this year than he was last year. According to total points, he's a legit MVP contender. But when you look at the Anthony Lynn offense, it's not like Anthony Lynn still has play calling duties in Detroit. And yet Justin Herbert looked great in that system. And now running the Joe Lombardi Saints, watered down Saints offense that they're running there, it hasn't really mattered because this guy's just kind of awesome. It's not to say he's immune from making mistakes. He's had a couple of ups and downs over the course of the season. But usually, if he's in a situation where it's kind of a neutral game script or better, and he has the ability to sling it, he's a scary dude to play against. That's why I think this team's a top contender. My thing that I don't like would be the offensive system. I think that it frustrates me when you look around the league at some of these young quarterbacks and who they get surrounded with. And especially, like, this isn't a Drew Brees skill set that Justin Herbert has. Like, if you wanted to get Lombardi with Tua in Miami, then I'd be like, okay, I can see, I get the logic behind that. This one, logically, for all the things that we praise with Brandon Staley, logically, I do get confused about that. What I will say, though, is finish off with another thing that I like. They added 2 players on their offensive line their offseason. They added our top-ranked center in points earned, Corey Linsley, who came over from the Packers, and they added Rashawn Slater, who is the 5th-ranked tackle in the NFL and the top-ranked rookie tackle in the NFL. So slam dunk, both of those guys. And we knew those were going to be good picks coming in, or we thought they were going to be good, but they've really fit in well, and I think are part of the reason why things continue to look good for Justin Herbert's future. I agree with you that they're a bad matchup against the Patriots and the Ravens, but I think they're right there with those teams in terms of the way that I handicap things. Let's get to a team that I don't like as much. The Bengals, also 7-5. And you've been on the fade the Bengals bandwagon for a while now, Bryce. What's the stat to know about them?
We talk about this a lot. We talk about boom rate and bust rate, plays that net more than 1 expected point added or less than -1 expected points, respectively. And Joe Burrow has been very inconsistent this year. He ranks 3rd in boom rate, 6th in bust rate, the latter of which can partially be attributed to being 5th in interception rate and sack rate. And this is just not a quarterback that is playing as he was built, right? Like the whole Joe Burrow hype was that he was a really good processor and that he made really smart decisions with the ball and that he was physically limited, but he would be able to overcome that.
Yeah, the book was get him in empty and all the time, get 5 guys into the routes, and he's going to pick the defense apart.
Yeah, and they've run a lot of empty too, but the results have not been there on a consistent basis. So when you take a player that everybody will agree is physically limited in Joe Burrow and you add that down-to-down volatility to the mix, it's really hard to feel confident about their Super Bowl outlook moving forward, especially considering some of the teams they've got left on their schedule. I mean, they're sitting at 7-5 right now. They'd be the 6th seed if the season ended today, but they've got some tough matchups these next few weeks. They play Baltimore. They beat them early.
That's the only team that
season.
they've really beaten this year. That's the only good team that they've beaten, in my opinion.
They did beat the brakes off of Baltimore, so maybe they'll do that again. But Baltimore is not an easy out. They've got Kansas City. They've got Cleveland, who I'm not high on either, but they lost to Cleveland pretty
They
big
got
back
smoked
in
by
week
Cleveland
9.
Just a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, they've got Denver and San Francisco, which but it's not like those teams are the Jets or the Texans. So they've got to close the season out in a strong way. They're by no means a lock to make it. I would say it's more likely that they miss out entirely than making it to the Super Bowl, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. I see them as totally mediocre. They're the 16th ranked team in total points, 17th on offense, 13th on defense. So, I mean, I think that what you look at here is a team that's outperformed what I thought they would be this year. So I'll give them credit for that. But I don't think that they do anything well enough where I think that they could win the 3 games that you need to win to go to the Super Bowl or to potentially get into that bye and then have to win 2 games to get there. It's very hard for me to imagine that. They've got 2 games, like you said, coming up, San Francisco and Denver. That's kind of like the are you for real games, right? They can be as good as 9-5 out of that stretch. They can be as bad as 7-7. And then they've got those 3 tough AFC games that you talked about at the end, where I think if they emerge 9-5, that's when they'll fall apart. So I see them as a jumpable team in the stack of playoff contenders. But hey, they've got an opportunity the next 2 weeks to string together a couple and give themselves a nice path, at least, if they can keep it together. But I'm with you. I'm unmoved by the Bengals. Team I'm more moved by, the Bills. 7-5 also. They are in the 7th seed if the season ended today. What's the stat to know about the Bills?
I've got a couple for you. Since their week 2 blowout of Miami, they have either scored 26 points or more or 15 points or fewer in all their games, including 3 games of 10 or less. This is an offense that is also super up and down. They have got to get out of their own way a little bit. They have easily the highest first down pass rate in the NFL. It's like 67% or something like that. But their first down success rate is 30th in the league at 38%. So they are failure to launch a lot of the time. And I think we've seen what they're capable of when their offense is clicking. They're about as dangerous an offense as there is in the league. But that inconsistency from down to down, we keep talking about consistency, is a bit worrisome. I think their defense is legit. I know they lost Trey White, but overall, I really like that defensive unit. Even though the Pats kind of dictated the way the game went, I thought they played fairly well in that game. I kind of like the Bills. I like I said, I think their defense is good enough to win you playoff games, and that offense it's volatile, but when they're on, like, they're really on. It's not like they're the Bengals, and it's when they're on,
they can get some points in bunches.
Yeah, they when the Bills offense is on, they're putting up 5 touchdowns.
So I'm with you. I like this team. I might like them better than the Patriots, honestly. It's really close for me between those 2 teams. I think that their defense is absolutely awesome. Like, hot fire, so good. We know about the 2 shutouts earlier in the year. That was when they were giving up 20 points when they weren't shutting people out. Since their bye week, they've given up 11, 9, 17. It's just that one Indianapolis game where they gave up 41, which was like the Frank Reich revenge game, homecoming, whatever type thing. Throw that one out the window. Give up 6 to New Orleans. New England was afraid to throw against them. Like let's call a spade a spade. Like, the weather was what it was, but it was the weather plus the fact that Buffalo's defensive line is an absolute terror for any offensive line. You cannot pass protect against them. So I think they're a really tough out. And it just comes down to, like you were saying, can Josh Allen be good Josh Allen? If you're going to abandon the run, it's basic football theory, right? Every analyst will say, oh, passing is averaging 7 yards a play. Rushing averages 4 yards a play. Everybody should pass more. The consistency, right? When you think about like the stock market, right? You get more consistent returns from the run game. So that's why you see this boom or bust type of offense. I think it's a matter of when they're clicking, when they're good enough, when Josh Allen is good Josh Allen, it overcomes that. And when you're relying on a guy that doesn't have consistent accuracy to have a consistent accuracy, you can end up with these these games where you just don't possess the ball enough. I do think when they end up scoring a lot, it's usually because the defense is helping them score on offense. So most of what I love here is about their defense. I'm going to really love seeing them against Tampa Bay this week because Tampa Bay is not going to just
That's a big test.
Tampa Bay is going to throw. Like they're not going to play that game like New England did. So it should be a lot of fun to see that sort of matchup. And you know that Brady's going to be looking at whatever replacement corner the Bills have in there for Tre'Davious White.
And to add on to the Bucs matchup you talked about, people don't run on the Bucs.
They don't even try.
They don't like teams do not try to run on Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Bills are a team that does not try to run. So I think if the Bills hang tough or even beat the Bucs, I think you have to seriously start considering them as a threat to come out of the AFC East.
I think the way they do it too is if Josh Allen rushes for 50 yards, 100 yards, I think Josh Allen could be their leading rusher.
That's their whole run game, right? Like it's
he is their best ball carrier, right? Like
like they're either RPOing or giving him the ball on quarterback power, or he's scrambling for a first down.
I forget who I watched the other day run an RPO. Play got kind of blown up after he already pulled the ball. He noticed that the safety was coming down and going to intercept it if he threw it. And so the quarterback just turned and followed the running back on the RPO. And I'm like, man, I love that. That's like, always run RPOs like that. Like if you got Josh Allen or something like that, like why not? All right, a couple more teams as we gotta accelerate through here. On the outside looking in, the Steelers. What's the stat to know about the 6-5-1 Steelers?
That they have the worst starting quarterback in the NFL.
Enough said.
They rank 32nd in passing points a game.
I don't think anybody's like trying to talk themselves into Ben, right?
No. Well, Ben is.
Yeah, great for the defense, getting them to be, what they have been so far this year, but not a contender.
No.
Okay. I think this one's a little more interesting. The last team that we'll talk about in the AFC, number 9 seed as it currently stands, they're actually behind the Steelers by win percentage. 7-6, Indianapolis Colts. What's the stat to know?
So something I thought was really interesting was that Jonathan Taylor's EPA per rush is the exact same as Carson Wentz's EPA per pass.
Ooh, that's something.
Which is like you don't see that a whole lot, and that's partially a testament to how good Jonathan Taylor is. But the Colts are not a bad football team by any means. I like them a lot more than some of the other teams that we've talked about, namely the Titans and the Bengals, as contenders. Wentz has been playing more under control this year. Credit to Frank Reich for reining him in, especially after they got up to a bad start. It looked like the season might be lost. But they're another team that I think is pretty well rounded. Their offense is fun. So
here's what I say. Watch out, because the schedule is tough. They've got New England and Arizona on their schedule after their bye week this coming week. And we already talked about how that's a big game for New England. Though, you lose those 2 games, all of a sudden you'd be 7-8 now. And you're talking about you run out of enough games for the Titans to lose in order to overtake them in the division. And that's probably the best path to making the playoffs. Maybe if you want to bet on the Bengals falling off, maybe you can steal the Bengals spot in the playoffs. That's a way in also. But either way, not a lot of margin for error. Probably can't afford to lose both those games. Vegas and Jacksonville after that, should soften up a little bit. But, the story with the Colts is simple for me. Like, they started off the season 0-3 because Carson Wentz was not built into their system yet. They had the injuries going on up front, not just Wentz, but other ones too. It took a while for him to get kind of ingrained into what was going to work for them. Frank Reich's done an amazing job getting him back, into the total points leaderboard for quarterbacks as opposed to where he was last year for Philadelphia. They're going to be giving up that first round pick for him. So they better be, balls to the wall to make the playoffs. And these next 2 games, they'll both be Saturday night primetime games. New England versus New England at Arizona. They're a scary team. Like you said, nobody would want to play them. I would put them probably above the Chargers and just behind, like maybe the Chiefs, Patriots, and Bills right now if I'm handicapping things.
You'd put them above the Chargers?
I think I would. I think I'd rather play the Chargers than the Colts.
You would rather play Justin Herbert than Carson Wentz?
With all the other players on the team included, yeah. Not just the one guy. Yeah,
I know it's a team sport, but
I think the Colts are a problem. Like, I really do. I think the Colts are a problem. DeForest Buckner's a problem. Darius Leonard's a problem. What's the nickel's name? What is he, 23? He's a problem. This is a team that I think is really good up front, obviously with Quentin Nelson and what they do up there. Jonathan Taylor is playing out of his mind. They're very close to me. I put those teams right next to each other. So here, my AFC tiers, I have the Chiefs at the top. Then I have the Bills just ahead of the Patriots. And then I kind of throw in the Ravens next, drop a tier to the Chargers and Colts. I'll give the Colts just a half of a hair of a lead there. And then below that, the Titans, Bengals, whatever. I don't believe in those teams.
You're really pressing me here. I go back and forth on some of these teams, man. Like, I kind of want to take the cowards way out and not rank them at all. I think
coward.
I would say like my top two in no particular order is like Chargers, Chiefs.
Chargers number one.
I said in no particular order. You're not going to
okay.
get me on this one. And then that second tier is like Bills, Colts, Ravens. Patriots over the Ravens. I really like the Chargers, man. I just, like I said,
I mean, it's what you're doing is it seems simple to me. You've got two win because of quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't count Lamar Jackson, he's somewhere. He's interesting. He's its own category. But I mean, Mahomes and Herbert are those guys, and you're like, I like those guys the best.
Yeah, basically, I'm a big believer in quarterback play.
I don't think you're wrong. All right, here's what we'll do. I think we should cut it off here. We should regroup next week to talk about the NFC top contenders. We can talk about the stats to know for each of those teams. We can talk about who we like and who we don't like. Otherwise, we'll keep the listeners here for a full 2 hours. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. They can come back next week, break it up. So let's wrap this up. Thank you to all the listeners for listening to the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast. This was the Manocherian Rossler special edition going through the AFC playoff contenders. We'll be back a week from now. We'll be talking about the NFC contenders to go along with it. On behalf of Justin Stein, Mark Simon, Bryce Rossler, and the entire team over here at SIS, thank you for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast, and we'll see you next week.